Okay, so here I am once again sifting through the trash in a vain attempt to find a diamond in the rough. And have we found said diamond today when it comes to PC monitors? Well, in order to answer that question, let's go ahead and take a look at today's monitor, the KTC M27T20 mini LED monitor, which thank God is less than 100 characters long and a pretty decent name overall, which by the way, thank you to KTC for sending this over for review. But in terms of specs, we're talking 2560 by 1440 at 165 hertz, 27 inches, mini LED, 576 local dimming zones, allegedly a contrast ratio of 1,000,000 to 1, a response time of allegedly 1 millisecond MPRT, and yes, it is G-Sync and FreeSync compatible and has an HDR rating of 1000, so very good start. The stand is also excellent, does everything you would expect it to do, and in terms of ports, you do get a barrel plug for the power, which I'd like to see a regular PC plug in the future, but you also get 2 USB 3, 1 USB 3 upstream, 2 HDMI 2, 1 DisplayPort 1.4, a Type-C, and a headphone jack. And also apparently it has 90-watt charging and a KVM switch, so it's all looking pretty good. Sure, it doesn't have 2.1 for HDMI, but you shouldn't need it. And it also has VESA mount support, and all this for $460. That is a very, very competitive price point. In fact, I remember getting regular LCD panels for around this price with similar specs in the past. So to get mini LED with HDR 1000, that's really, really good and is definitely going to be putting a lot of pressure on other monitors. All the specs look good, but does it actually deliver? Well, let's go ahead and talk about color first, and I will say it does seem a little bit oversaturated, both in sRGB as well as HDR. It's not horrible, but it does seem a little bit much, and hopefully it can be adjusted with future firmware updates, which by the way, yes, you can update the firmware, and if you do so, it will fix some of the issues to do with VRR, or at least that was my experience. So no issues after the firmware update. But moving on to color calibration, and here you can see that, well, out of the box, it is a little bit of a mess. It doesn't really track EOTF curve correctly, and it also has an off-balance RGB. Now, thankfully, I was able to correct that quite a bit with a few adjustments to the monitor, as well as an ICC profile, which I will have linked in the description below, and I do highly suggest you go ahead and take a look at. But what about HDR? And here, unfortunately, it is a mess, and there's really nothing you can do to fix it. As you can see, especially at the bottom of the EOTF curve, it's just not tracking it correctly at all. So that's not great to see and will be, unfortunately, really difficult to use for professional HDR work for that reason. But moving on to color volume, and here in sRGB you can see around 150% BT709, around 100% DCI-P3, and around 68% BT2020. And then looking at the HDR results, it's basically the same, but just a little bit better. So everything's looking really good here. But what about the brightness? Very important for HDR. 100% window, it is by and large the best I have ever measured out of a 1440p display yet. Now, admittedly, I haven't tested any other 1440p mini LED monitors, as they're very hard to come by or very expensive, at least the ones that I've seen previously. So yeah, this is looking really, really good here, leading the pack by a significant amount, even compared to other LCD monitors. Then in a 10% window, once again, it does lead the pack, although this time less convincingly so, as some of those MLAW OLEDs, especially that Asus one, do actually get some pretty good peak highlight brightness that looks very good. But what about a game? And here, it actually doesn't take the lead. It's in third place, although I will say, even though it doesn't have technically the highest peak brightness, the overall scene was definitely brighter, at least in my experience, when compared to the OLED alternative. But speaking of brightness, what about the minimum brightness? And here I did measure 0.03 nits, so that's actually pretty dang good, even for a mini LED monitor. And in terms of a contrast ratio, depending on if you have local dimming on or off, you'll either get 1,470 to 1, or I actually got as much as 13,267 to 1, which is very, very good for a mini LED monitor and is going to lead to excellent contrast ratios, although I don't know how they got 1,000,000 to 1. Honestly, I couldn't reproduce it, so I'd love to know what they were measuring. I measured a checkerboard window, which is pretty standard to do. Now, does it overclock? No. Moving on to latency, here you can see that it is actually closer to the bottom of the pack. So that's not great, but I will say 35 milliseconds, it's not terrible. I'd like to see it at maybe 29 or 28 milliseconds. I think that would be really good. But do keep in mind it's going up against mostly 240 Hz monitors in this space. And so overall, not too bad considering it does have the additional step of the mini LED backlight. In terms of motion clarity, here we go. This is going to be a big problem for a lot of mini LED monitors, and once again, it does appear to be a little bit of an issue here, as even at 160 Hz, I think due to it being what I believe is a VA panel, there is some dark level smearing, so that's not good to see there. And as you can see, the lower the refresh rate goes, much like any other LCD monitor, the worse it gets, to a point where at 60 Hertz, it's kind of a blurry mess. So this is certainly not going to be my #1 pick for esports gaming or something like that. But what about text clarity? And because it's an RGB type of display, it does actually have pretty dang good text clarity, although I will say because it is 1440p and not 4K or higher, there is going to be some pixelization, especially if you sit closer to the monitor. So pretty good, but not excellent. But moving on to the finish, and oh god, yes, it's using a matte finish. Now, it's not the worst one I've seen, I'll give them that. It's fairly okay for a matte finish as matte finishes come, but a matte finish is a matte finish, and yes, unfortunately, that is going to harm the clarity pretty significantly. It is also, unfortunately, gonna probably be affecting the contrast ratios pretty significantly as well. So in the future, I'd love to see it move from a matte finish to some sort of a glossy finish, even if it still has some anti-reflective properties. It would just be a huge, huge upgrade for the display. And speaking of huge upgrade, talking about viewing angles, unfortunately, mini LED, it's just not great. You're not going to get good viewing angles out of mini LED, and this is no exception. If you go at an angle, you're going to see blooming and other issues, such as a loss of perceived color. So that's not great either. And honestly, another huge upgrade that could be made here is if they did curve the display, these viewing angle problems would go away if you're sitting right in front of the monitor, as the curve would ensure that you're getting an optimal view at all angles. But with all that being said, do I recommend this monitor despite its flaws, as all mini LED monitors have flaws? And I'm going to say yes. At $460, I think you're going to be very hard pressed to find any other monitor in that price class bringing similar performance, especially if you're mostly playing single player games. Getting that really good HDR experience despite its inaccuracies is excellent at such a low price, and I think it's the lowest I've ever seen an HDR 1000, at least personally certified monitor, at 1440p or higher. So overall, yeah, I'm definitely going to give it the thumbs up. I'd like to see some improvements with firmware, and if a future revision comes around, curved as well as glossy would also make huge, huge improvements to the display as well. But overall, very good. I'll have an Amazon affiliate link in the description below if you're looking to purchase this display to make it easier for you, and hey, it'll help me as well. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes of up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And with 48 gigabits per second of bandwidth, it can easily drive 8K 60 FPS or 4K 144 FPS 10-bit HDR video through its ultra-thin, flexible, and durable housing, and it even supports ER. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out Rupro on Amazon today.